Hey, welcome to Offshore Audio. I'm Andrew, a live sound engineer, and I'm here to help you mix better live events. Speaking of mixing live events, quite often when you're mixing front of house for live events, that used to be all you needed to do. But nowadays, after the pandemic, in the post-pandemic world, it's more and more normal that you're expected to mix to a live stream as well. Now, if you're really lucky, you have a separate engineer, a separate technician who does that whole job. But even if you're only half lucky and you have someone to monitor the stream, you're still expected to create a serviceable mix and send that out to the stream. So it's important that you know how to do that. This video was requested by a viewer who was mixing audio for their church live stream. So if you're in church sound, this video is just for you. It's also really applicable to any kind of conference or corporate sound. And if you're ever mixing a live band being streamed, this should help you out as well. We'll start off by looking at conceptually on a kind of broad level what it is, like how do you create a mix and send that to a live stream. Then we'll dig into an actual mixer tutorial and I'll show you how to set up all the buses and stuff on a Midas M32. And then I'll show you some extra processing that you might want to consider applying to your live mix. Now this is on an M32, but the techniques are all applicable to any mixer that you're using. The actual fundamentals do not change, simply the buttons that you need to press. If you're looking for a quick start to get better mixes, then I have a gift for you, and that is my 3-step guide to perfect EQ. You can head to the description and click on the link, or you can visit offshoreaudio.no/EQ and get my 3-step PDF guide that'll take you through sort of how I think about conceptually applying EQ, and it'll give you some concrete moves that you can make to just start making great EQ moves right now. So offshoreaudio.no/EQ for that free PDF guide. Speaking of the pandemic, I happen to have coronavirus right now, so this might be a little hoarse and slow, but without further ado, let's dive in. So conceptually, looking at a live stream, there are 3 things that are super important before you even get started with your mixer, right? The number one is your sound source. Think about what you like about sound from TV, live streams, films and stuff, right?
Strawberries.
It's a really close sound. It's really, really up and in your face, and there's not a lot of ambience. If there is ambience, it's usually added afterwards. So with that in mind, you need to get your microphones nice and close to your sound source. If you're fitting headset microphones, you need to make sure they're right down at the mouth. And if you're using instruments, make sure that there's not a lot of room for the room to get into that mix. Because very quickly, after you send 10 microphones or so to a live stream, that little bit of ambience that you're picking up adds up and adds up. And then eventually everything sounds a bit echoey and weird and roomy and maybe a bit phasey. So get close to your sound source. Number two is make sure you get a rehearsal in if you possibly can, because otherwise you're just sort of taking your best guess at what a live stream should sound like. Ideally, you want to get all the people and parties involved on the stage, mic'd up, sound sources coming into your mixer, and you want to have a bit of time to build that live stream mix. Monitor it in your headphones and make sure that the level and the levels of each individual source are well balanced when you start. Because no one wants to hear on a live stream someone speaking, or see them on a live stream, see them start speaking, and then hear no volume and then a sudden jump of 20 decibels. You want to try and not have that, if at all possible. Now, the third important tip I'm going to give you before we start is you get in what you put out. You need someone who's good at public speaking, can project their voice to sound good on a live stream. You need someone who knows how to use a microphone if they're using a handheld to sound good on a live stream. You need instruments to be well tuned. You need good mic positioning and technique to sound good on a live stream. So make sure everything is great before you start playing around with settings on the mixer. Let's dive in and let's talk about how conceptually we build this up before we actually look at the mixer. You've got your inputs, right? You're connecting your inputs to your mixer and then you're gaining them up. And if you're in the habit of putting the fader to 0 and then setting the gain until it sounds nice to PA, must stop now. Really not a fan of this stuff because it's terrible gain structure. If you set the gain so that it sounds nice in the PA, you might really struggle to get an appropriate volume in the live stream. And we'll talk about reaching volume levels in the live stream in part 3 of this video. You want to gain your microphones up so that you have an appropriate gain level, and then you can adjust your master fader for your PA if you need to, but you get that gain level right at the beginning. From there, you need to pick a bus, an auxiliary output or a bus, whatever you want to call it. But basically, you're creating this separate mix for your live stream. We'll call it bus 1. And you activate bus 1 and you send all the channels that you need to have in your live stream to bus 1 at levels that are appropriate. Routing. You need to go into your routing screen of your mixer and you need to select a physical output on the stage box or on the physical mixer in front of you that you're going to send this particular mix, bus 1, out of. Let's call it output 1. So output 1 on the back of the mixer now is going to be outputting bus 1 that you are sending your output channels to. And you take an XLR from that output and you connect it to the sound card for the live stream. So the live stream computer is going to need a sound card and you're going to need to be able to connect your XLR cable into that sound card to get the sound from your mixer into the live stream computer. So that's your sort of high level overview of roughly how you go about doing it. But let's have a look in detail on an M32 mixer. So let's have a look on the M32 mixer, right? Let's have a look at how we would set this particular mixer up for mixing to a stream. First thing we want to think about is mixing to a bus and sending that bus to a stream. Now, I've made videos before covering routing and bus setup on this mixer, pre and post fader sends, so I will link to them down below. I'll just go over what we're doing very quickly here. What we're going to do is we're going to pick a bus that we're going to send to our stream, and that can be mono or stereo. I have a bus set up here already that I've called stream. It's bus number 7. It's a pre-fader send to the stream. So that means that whatever I do, whatever I mix for my front of house, I have a completely independent mix for my stream. Now this might be what you want, or it might not be, depending on if you want to just send a sort of copy of your mix to the stream. You could send it post-fader, and then when you made adjustments on your front of house mix, they would occur on your stream mix as well. But basically what I'm going to do is set up my bus 7 stream, and then I'll go into my routing screen and I would just need to pick a physical output where this bus is coming out. And let's say output 7, keep it simple, mix bus 7, output 7. And then I just select mix bus 7 as the output here, and it's set to post fader. And all that means is that this fader controls the master output of this bus. And then I connect an XLR cable to output 7. I take that to the streaming input, connect that up, and whatever I send to this bus goes to the streaming. What that means now is that when I want to create a mix for the stream, I just select bus 7, hit my fader flip, and then I can send my outputs to that mix. So for example, if this was all microphones, I can just listen in by soloing this mix. I can hear what's going out to the stream. I can see that the level is appropriate on the meters here, and I can adjust using these faders here. I take my headphones off, I adjust front of house mix by taking it off fader flip. And then I go onto fader flip, put my headphones on, solo, listen, and I say, okay, person number 2 is a bit loud actually in the mix. I just bring them down a little bit. Alternatively, if you were doing a post fader send, what you would do is you would just send all of these out of your mix at 0, and then you would hope essentially that your mix on your front of house mix reflects well on your stream. And if it doesn't, you can always check in with Solo and make those adjustments there. Now, another way that you can do it is by using a matrix output and also using groups. Right? So this is a little more complicated, but you can get a little more flexibility. So if you're mixing a band, for example, this can give you a little more flexibility when sending the outputs to the stream. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our output on our routing screen. So routing over to outputs. We'll still use output 7 because why not? But what we're going to do is we're going to change it to output is going to be matrix 1. At this point. I'm just doing this in mono. You could be doing it in stereo, but quite often streams are in mono anyway, so you don't need to worry too much about that. So what we do now is we go to our matrix. You see it's here. So this is our stream matrix now. This fader here governs what is going out to the streaming equipment, but we need to decide what goes into this. And we're going to use groups this time. So let's say I have bass, drums, guitar, and vocals. I'm going to go to my buses and I'm going to turn these into groups. Again, I've got a video on groups specifically. I can link to that. But for now, we're going to select these, go over to configuration and select subgroup. And we'll just go through it, make sure all 4 of these are subgroups. They go in pairs, so that's all 4 of them. So drums, bass, guitars, vocals. Now, here's an extra trick we can do. What we can do is we can make sure that everything is sent to our groups at 0. By selecting them, going to fader flip, we send all of our drums to our drum bus at 0. And then, we take our bass bus, send our bass inputs, guitars, and then vocals, right? So now what we've done is we've just set up our group, drums, bass, guitars, vocals. Now what we can do, right, is we forget these groups for a moment. We are mixing our front of house sound over here because we select these inputs and we have this main stereo switch selected. That means that these inputs here that we're mixing on the mixer are going to our main outputs, our front of house mix. Now we select our matrix outputs and we make sure that the main stereo is turned off. So that means whatever we do here is not going to affect the speakers in the room. What we want to do is we want to make sure that the output of these faders goes to our matrix, which is then going to our streaming device. So we select them and we can go over to sends, and you see here, these are our sends to our matrices. What we can do then is we can make sure that they are set to post fader down here. And we do that by pressing down on the D-pad here and then just switching it to post fader. It's already set to post fader, so I don't need to worry about that. Just press up again and use the encoders to set these outputs to 0. Now what that just means is that however we adjust this fader, it will go unaltered to our matrix 1, which is then going further to our streaming device. So you follow me here? We mix our front of house inputs here, and that also passes on to our group, right? And then what we can do is we can use our groups to mix for the stream. So we can just turn everything up to 0 to begin with. Now they're getting an equal amount of drums, bass, guitar, vocals to the stream, reflective of the mix, which is happening over here for our front of house. And if we want to solo our stream and have our headphones handy, what we can do then is if we say, there's too much drums in the mix, we can just bring it down, put bass up, guitars down, vocals up. And then as we listen to the mix, we can make quick adjustments just using the master faders for our groups. So let's talk a little bit about processing then. It can be enough to just send this output straight to the stream and think, hey, that's great, right? But you really need to be monitoring it. You really need to solo it often, perhaps even have your headphones on that all the time, lift them up and listen. And you also need to think about some decisions that you might make going out to that stream, because people are going to be listening on laptops and phones and little headphones. They're not listening on the high-powered PA that you're listening to the front of house mix on. So different rules apply. My first tip I'm going to give you doesn't even apply to this streaming bus that we've got set up. It applies to the inputs. If you're mixing vocals, I highly suggest that you have Auto Mixer turned on. First 8 channels of the Midas M32 and the Behringer X32 have an Auto Mixer function. And you access that by selecting the channel, pressing down on the D-pad, and then you select an Auto Mix group. There are 2 groups, X and Y. When there are 8 microphones, let's say, in one group, X, the mixer can intelligently recognize who is speaking and then turn the other ones down. That means you get less spill and a more natural sounding mix going to the streaming device. For this to function that way, your sends need to be post fader. If you're using the group, that's fine. If you're using buses, make sure you're using post fader to then get the benefit of this auto mixer setting on your vocals on the stream. Another trick, if you've got something like a noisy wireless microphone, is to use an expander on the channel so that when someone starts speaking, the channel can recognize that and then bring that volume up. And you can do that by going into your gate settings and then changing the mode here from gate to expander. Now, I recommend using the most gentle one, which is expander 2 here. And now what that means is that when you dial in your threshold settings using the gate, when the voice goes above a certain point, it will increase the volume. It's a lot more natural than using an actual gate because you don't get this stuttering, starting, stopping. Now, a big one on the actual bus itself is to use compression. Think about this as mastering. Think about adding gentle but firm compression to make sure that the sound that people hear at home is even. Because although a difference here in the venue of 6 decibels or something in someone speaking can be altered quickly by you, and people are quite forgiving in live venues, at home on some speakers, on a little low-powered laptop speaker, you really need every decibel you can get, right? So you select your bus, activate your compressor over here, and just dial in a low ratio of like 2, maybe a slow, medium attack, 50 to 100, slow release, 151, and then just dial that in until you've got some decibels of gain reduction. You want to keep a narrow dynamic range, right? You don't want it to be wide. You don't want the quiet bits to be really quiet and the high bits to be really high. You're aiming to sort of stay in a small region of space, right? So by talking about that, we come on to loudness as well. Now, the meter here is your friend. When you're sending to streaming, they will want a specific level to be sent to them. If you're lucky, the streaming device will have its own gain and they will be able to gain up once it reaches you. You want to be able to send a high level, say something like -12 here. You don't want it to dip 15 decibels between the peak and the trough. You want it to be well compressed, well rounded, and you want to be able to deliver a high enough level that people at home can hear it. So on that topic of compression, another option for you, if you're using your buses, for example, your groups, is to add compression on each of the groups gently, with that low ratio, dial that in. And then on your matrix, just have a limiter set really high up here so that you can push that volume, but that hits a limiter and it won't distort when it's going to that stream. My final note as well is for EQ. You can, of course, activate your EQ and perform a little bit of adjustment here going to the stream. What I will say is that if you have tuned your PA well, if the PA is producing sound evenly across the space and you have listened to it, tuned it and adjusted it so that it produces nice, clear sound, a microphone that sounds good coming out the PA should also sound good going to the stream. So there shouldn't be too much need to do stuff for the stream on the EQ section, but you have that possibility here. Let's sum it up then, shall we? Gain up properly, route the inputs that you're using to a bus, route that bus to a physical output, connect that physical output to the sound card, which is connected to the streaming computer. Remember to use headphones to monitor your stream constantly to make sure that everything is sounding nice on the way out. Use the meters as well to make sure that you're sending the appropriate level to the stream and that your dynamic range is reasonable. Speaking of dynamic range, use compression to limit the dynamic range of the live stream so that you can send a healthy level. You don't have any crazy peaks, but most of the time it's nice and audible. Finally, if you're feeling adventurous, try using groups and matrices to have a bit more control on the fly over your mix, which you're sending to the live stream. If you want some help getting started with EQ, just a reminder that you can get the free PDF guide, 3 Steps to Perfect EQ, in the description down below, or at offshoreaudio.no/EQ. Really simple PDF guide to just get you making better EQ decisions right now. Was this helpful to you? If it was, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. That lets me know to make more of this stuff for other people who also find it useful. And leave me a comment down below and let me know, what do you do when you have live streams? Do you have to mix live streams? Are you lucky enough to only get to mix front of house sound? Or if you are mixing live streams, where are you mixing it? Is it in a church, in a venue, corporate events? I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a comment down below. But until next time, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.